High above the rest of the world, tucked under the steep pitch of a shingled roof, sat a room defined by silence and wood. The walls were crafted from honey-colored cedar, planks that had aged into a deep, warm hue, releasing a faint, sweet scent that reminded one of old libraries and sun-dried hay. The floor was covered in a rug the color of forest moss, thick enough to swallow the sound of a footfall completely. At the far end of this sanctuary sat a large circular window. It was not a common window. Its frame was made of heavy, hand-polished brass that had mellowed into a matte gold over many decades. 8 thin spokes radiated from the center like a stationary star, dividing the glass into perfect triangular panes. Outside, the evening was just beginning to settle, pulling a veil of violet and indigo over the distant, unmoving trees. The room held this light and cradled it, staying perfectly still as the world below began to fade into the coming night. Through the circular glass, the horizon appeared as a long, unwavering line where the dark earth met the deepening sky. There were no flickering city lights here, no neon interruptions, only the natural, slow transition of color. The violet at the edge of the world slowly dissolved into a bruised plum, which then climbed upward, merging into a navy blue so deep it looked like heavy velvet. A single thin cloud drifted across the upper panes, moving so slowly it was almost impossible to see its progress. It was a long, wispy strand, like a piece of pulled silk, catching the very last of the sun's hidden light on its underside. It glowed a faint, dusty rose for a few minutes before losing its color and fading into the general shadow of the night. The window framed this change with a steady, unblinking gaze, acting as a portal that turned the vastness of space into a series of quiet, manageable moments. As the blue deepened into the color of a dark sapphire, the first star appeared. It did not twinkle at first. It was simply a tiny, steady point of silver light, pinned to the center of the window's upper right quadrant. It looked like a grain of salt resting on a dark table. Slowly, as the atmosphere above the attic settled and cooled, the silver point began to pulse, a rhythmic, slow expansion and contraction of light. Soon, another star appeared to the left, then a cluster of 3 below it, forming a small, nameless triangle. They were millions of miles away, yet they felt as though they were resting just on the other side of the glass, close enough to touch if the window were to be opened. The brass frame of the window caught a hint of their distant light, creating a thin, metallic glimmer along the inner rim that followed the curve of the wood. The room remained in total darkness, allowing the sky to become the only source of focus and the only source of light. Near the window stood a tall, slender telescope made of the same dark brass as the circular frame. It rested on 3 sturdy wooden legs, its lens capped and quiet. It did not need to be used tonight. Its presence alone added to the feeling of observation and peace. The shadow of the telescope stretched long and thin across the moss-colored rug, a dark finger pointing toward the closed door of the attic. The brass cylinders of the telescope were cool to the touch, holding the ambient temperature of the evening air. Occasionally, a faint, singular click could be heard as the metal adjusted to the cooling room, a tiny sound that only served to emphasize the deep silence that followed. The sky outside continued its descent into darkness, the navy turning into a rich obsidian black that seemed to stretch on forever, held in place by the brass spokes of the window. From the bottom edge of the window, a pale, milky glow began to bleed upward. It was the moon rising with a heavy silver patience. At first, only a thin, curved sliver of its rounded edge was visible, casting a sharp white light against the lower brass spokes. Gradually, the full circle emerged, a vast, cratered pearl hanging in the void. The moonlight was different from the starlight. It was a cold, liquid glow that poured into the attic, turning the honey-colored cedar to the color of ash and silver. The shadows in the room shifted, growing longer and softer. The mossy rug now looked like a silver field, and the telescope became a sharp silhouette of angles and clean lines. The moon did not move quickly. It sat in the frame of the sky, a steady, silent companion to the room, its light reflecting off the glass panes in a way that made the window look like it was made of liquid light. The sky was not a flat void. Through the window, it revealed its hidden layers. There were patches where the darkness seemed thicker, almost tangible, and areas where the Milky Way spilled across the center of the panes like a trail of powdered diamonds. This celestial path was misty and soft, a blur of billions of lights so far away they merged into a single, glowing cloud of stardust. The window spokes divided this view into perfect geometric slices. In one slice, a distant planet shone with a steady, unblinking amber light. In another, the blackness was deep and empty, a silent well of space. The air outside the glass was perfectly still, and the window felt solid and cool, a sturdy barrier between the warmth of the attic and the infinite cold reach of the stars. One could spend hours watching the way the stars moved from one triangular pane to the next. Time in the attic was not measured by the ticking of a clock, but by the slow, inevitable rotation of the stars. If one watched a single star near the edge of a brass spoke, its movement became apparent over the course of many minutes. It would slowly slide behind the metal, then reappear on the other side, continuing its silent journey toward the horizon. This motion was as steady as a heartbeat, a cosmic clock that required no winding and made no sound. The moon, too, climbed higher, its light becoming more direct and brilliant. The craters and plains on its surface were visible as soft, gray shadows, giving the moon a sense of texture, weight, and ancient history. The room felt as though it were drifting through the night, a small wooden vessel carrying its passenger through the silent sea of the galaxy, anchored only by the weight of the brass window. As the night reached its middle point, the colors of the sky became even more muted and deep. The amber planet dipped below the bottom frame of the window, and new constellations rose from the darkness to take its place. The Milky Way seemed to brighten, its powdery trail becoming more defined against the obsidian backdrop. The wood of the attic hummed with a deep, silent resonance, the sound of a house completely at rest. The brass of the window no longer glinted with sharp light. It held a deep, resonant glow that felt heavy and permanent. The moon had reached its peak, hanging directly above the house, casting its light straight down so that the room was filled with a soft, even luminosity. There were no harsh shadows now, only a gentle silver clarity that touched every corner of the space, from the legs of the telescope to the edges of the moss-colored rug. Looking back toward the horizon, the line between the earth and the sky had vanished completely. It was all one vast, dark expanse, punctuated only by the occasional flicker of a star near the edge of the world. The trees outside were invisible, merged into the general shadow of the landscape. The only reality that remained was the window and the sky it held within its brass frame. The air in the attic was perfectly still, the scent of cedar now mixed with the cool, crisp hint of the night air pressing against the exterior of the glass. The spokes of the window felt like a compass, pointing toward the infinite, guiding the mind across the vast distances between the points of light. The stars remained steady, their silver pulses slow and comforting, repeating their ancient patterns over and over again. Slowly, the moon began its long descent toward the opposite side of the house, its silver light pulling back from the rug and returning to the shadows. As the moon dipped lower, the honey-colored tones of the cedar walls began to reappear in the dimness. The telescope remained a silent sentry, its task of observation complete for the night. The circular window held the last of the deep, true night, a perfect portal to the heavens. The brass spokes were now dark lines against a sky that was beginning to soften from obsidian back into a deep, regal purple. The rhythm of the stars continued, a slow, eternal turning that required nothing from the world below. The attic was silent, the house was still. The window remained open to the sky, watching the transition of the universe until the very first hint of light touched the brass rim.